All right, we're back for another In Case You Missed It. And this week we've got the man, the myth, and the Doug Rogers, the SVP of Biz Dev for NIC. Doug, you're one of the ones that every time Joe and I do one of these, we're like, we gotta get Doug back on. Last time we did one with you, I think was at NASDAQ, and that was back to conferences in person. So great to have you on virtually.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. And I do feel a bit special to be a second timer on the show. And you're right. It was a fun time when we could actually do it in person. But this will be just as exciting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, first question, tell us a little bit about NIC for those that are new, that aren't familiar with NIC. And then we'd love to learn a little bit about how COVID-19 has kind of impacted the work that you're doing in the market.
Sure. Happy to. First of all, in terms of NIC, so we are a company, we've been around for 28 years. We got our start in the state of Kansas. Our sole focus is how we work with governments to connect them to their consumers, their citizens, their constituents, however you want to define it. And quite candidly, our day-to-day is how we take out of that friction and just make it easier to navigate and understand how to find things, how to do things, et cetera. And I got to tell you, as exciting as this space has always been, it is like pouring gasoline on a fire, if you will, living through the last 120 days of this pandemic in terms of not only what government is thinking, but what individuals are thinking in terms of how they have to navigate this when all of a sudden everything has to be electronic because there is little to no in person. So it's definitely been an incredible and fascinating experience, if you will, over the last 120 days.
It's interesting you mentioned that because McKinsey had some recent research that came out that refers to what we're experiencing as the quickening. And when they looked at e-commerce, they said that over the last 3 months, we've accelerated growth by 10 years in terms of the use of digital services. What are you seeing in government right now?
Well, I would absolutely agree with McKinsey's report. And in that same vein, one of the things I think I read in the same article, Joe, is that they talked about, they were projecting by 2025 that they would have roughly 25% adoption in terms of digital payments. And they said in the last, let's call it 3 months, they have not only outpaced their projections for 2025, but they are going well past what they were expecting to happen by 2030. I, in many ways, actually think that is a microcosm of what government is experiencing. It has been interesting to see the expectations shift as this pandemic has forced behavior changes, rightly so, in terms of social distancing, in terms of being at home or being somewhat separated, and especially the severe limitation in some cases on being in some type of in-person event. And government has had to accelerate in the same way that many other businesses have to meet that need. And it's not that they weren't doing these things before. I mean, we've all been around this sector. We've experienced it. Government has been embracing not just digital government, but digital services over the last 5-10 years at a pretty decent clip. The change has been, it's never been the primary method of engagement. It's always been an alternative form. And that coin got flipped on its head in 120 days. And it is changing the perspective of not only how you do something, but why you do something, and forcing, quite frankly, this adoption. So, to your point that McKinsey said, it definitely feels like a quickening, but it's because there's not an alternative.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and we've talked about the new normal, the next normal, kind of fill in the blank on whatever phrase we're going to describe. It's kind of just the current and future reality that we're living in. I'm curious, when you look at all of the new behaviors like work from home and all of these things, what do you think is here to stay? What do you think might change kind of going forward? I know Joe and I were looking at, the potential for a fall recurrence. There was a lot of planning for that, but, we never actually got done with wave one. We're still in the thick of it, and it's, it's here to stay. So I'm curious, to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of the pandemic, we've started saying that it feels like the wave never crested to actually get to a second wave, to your point. Uh, First of all, I've never positioned myself as a prognosticator because it's certainly so much of this is subject to change. That being said, I think it is fair to expect that the services that government is adopting today to enable someone to go end to end with an engagement online is not going to go away. And part of this is this broader dynamic. There hopefully will be an endpoint to the pandemic, whether it's through a vaccine or some other type of mechanism. But for the foreseeable future, we are going to live in this hybrid environment where interaction in person is in much smaller numbers. It's not, well, it may never have been your first choice to go to the DMV offices, although there are a number of DMV offices that are well run. It is now absolutely at the bottom of the list because I don't want to be in a room in an enclosed space with a lot of other people. And so DMVs, Health and Human Services offices, property tax and county offices, they are all having to rethink, how do I do the end-to-end function digitally? And I don't see that going away. If for no other reason than people are not going to be, at least for the near future, in force in the same way they were. A great example, and once again, something that just gets adopted, it's going to roll. We saw in Hawaii, and I think this is endemic of many other processes, that as people went home, especially the government workers, and they were trying to interact with citizens, there were functions where they had to provide a piece of paper, and there was no recourse. And so this may seem like a very simple thing. We, in conjunction with them, deployed a service to upload documents. I mean, how 1990s is that? But to upload documents so that you didn't have that physical step, that's never going to go away now. I mean, it's now a byproduct of the workflow, and they're going to now restructure their workflow to accommodate and be much more efficient because of that. And that's probably a good thing, both for government and for the citizen or the individual themselves.
Yeah, so I kind of want to dig into that a little bit more so too, because I know that, when COVID-19 first hit, right, it was all about telework, remote work,
right,
laying the foundation, putting in place the infrastructure for that. And then, it got into more advanced things like contact tracing and looking at a variety of other things. What do you think is going to happen kind of 6 to 12 months out? What are the priorities that you're seeing? I mean, you work with state leaders across the country. What's on their radar for the next 6 months to a year?
Well, I will tell you the first thing that is on the radar, and it's not going to go away anytime soon, is how do I engage people as it relates to resources to deal with the pandemic? How do I navigate, whether it's around testing or access to healthcare, especially from a tracing perspective? And then how do I do the mandatory functions, renewing my driver's license, paying my property taxes, et cetera? And I don't see that changing. And if anything, I firmly believe that the things oriented around how people interact with government as it relates to this public health crisis is going to suck all of the oxygen out of the room for at least the next 3 months, 6 months. And much of the decision is going to be framed around how are we accelerating our interactions in that space. Now, part of what I think that means is that especially from the executive branch and the empowered chief information officers in many of these states, what they're going to be looking down and saying, one, we're not going to have the way things were in terms of interactions in person, or at least at the same level. Two, we know that we have breakages in the digital process where something had to happen in person, a piece of paper, a physical appointment, et cetera. And we've got to change that workflow. And then three, people are asking for so much information from us, we can't have them just tooling around on our site looking for it if for no other reason it doesn't help them, or the traffic load of having that many people look for things brings the site down. We've got to be much more prescriptive around here's what you need to know and where you need to go find it. So I think, Dustin, to your question, what's here to stay, or more so what's going to be the dominant things of 6 months from now, is how can government, and by extension the technologies they use, tell me the things I need to know based on the things I'm dealing with without having to ask me a lot of questions? How can they accomplish as many things as possible through this environment virtually? You can see me, you know who I am. I can give you stuff electronically. I don't need to necessarily come to your house, although it's a lovely place and I would love to go there sometime. They are going to support that, and that's not going to change. If anything, I think it's going to accelerate, and it's going to cause a ripple effect in terms of whole streams of workflows that before just were considered de facto. This has to be, and that's no longer going to be the case.
So we talked a little bit about when we started how we were at an event in person. Now we're here virtually and everything's virtual. How are you navigating the all virtual sales process now? How are you staying in contact with your current customers, with prospects, and doing everything that your day job requires?
Yeah, that is such a unique challenge in the sense that if one of the core things in sales is the relationship, and why that's important is because invariably the reason why people buy and engage with someone like NIC is because they trust you, and that relationship is critical, if you will, to establishing trust. Now, I will tell you, I think we are incredibly fortunate in this regard, in the sense that both our history and in 28 different states, we not only have a presence, but we have a team that live and work side by side, even though today it's virtually side by side, with many of the people across state agencies, both at the executive branch, all the way down into the individual agencies, et cetera. And so we're able to leverage those relationships that they have, that our team has, to broker conversations, to understand the things they're trying to solve, and then to help provide awareness to what are the things we can bring to the table. But I think the other part of it, Joe, is really a reaffirmation that the best sales engagement is a consultative engagement, which is really more so focused not on I'm trying to sell you something, but I'm trying to understand the problem you're trying to solve and bring an answer, even if it's not my answer. And I think more than ever, that is the type of conversation that we're seeing our partners and other agencies want to engage in. And we get a lot of value, and they get a lot of value, if nothing else, simply saying, have you seen what Idaho did? Have you seen what Hawaii did, or what Alabama did, or what these states did? Even if it doesn't mean that it's something that they can buy from us to do it. That has been a big part, if you will, of trying to change the dynamic of how we continue this engagement, even though we can't get on a plane, get in a car, and go sit down with you in person.
All right, Doug, we know you're a social guy. We all interact on Twitter together, but how do people follow you? Where do they follow you? There's my dog. And where do people say what NIC's up to?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at droger96. You can certainly follow NIC at EGOV, both on Twitter and LinkedIn. And many of the things that you will see, not only from myself, but from us, is talking a lot about what our partners are doing, whether it is increasing and expanding how you do appointment scheduling for different agencies, whether it's how we've launched unemployment filing services in states to really help better connect citizens to navigate that process. And even more recently, the work that we're doing in partnership with a couple other companies to facilitate testing for COVID and help individuals navigate just the complexity of what's happening in your own communities. Those are all parts of the things that we're sharing consistently, if for nothing else, to provide an information resource for everyone out there in the marketplace.
All right. Well, Doug, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing all the great stuff that you're working on at NIC. It's always good to pick your brain about what's happening in the market. And you'll be our first third timer, because we'll bring you back here in the next few weeks, as well as we, always like keeping up with what you're working on and what you're doing in the space. And, we're always very impressed by the great work that NIC is doing in the market. So thanks again for joining us, and to everyone that tuned in. We'll make sure that all the links that Doug talked about are in the show notes as well. And we look forward to seeing you at our next one. You can check out a recording of this at incaseyoumissedit.video. And you can also find it on LinkedIn. We're now streaming on YouTube as well. So lots of different places to plug in and engage. Doug, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.